In 2025, we rise with the tide. OEDA, pushing dreams, we're Ohio's pride. New spring event where talents
Hi, I'm
collide.
David Zach, President and CEO of the Ohio Economic Development Association. Welcome to OEDA Exchanges, the podcast where we uncover the tools, spotlight the people, explore the programs, and showcase the projects shaping economic development in Ohio and beyond. So let's dive in. Originally broadcast on December the 2nd, this special episode features a conversation with Jeff Finkle, a renowned leader in economic development and President Emeritus of the International Economic Development Council. This exchange was hosted for OhioCED certified economic developers and offers Jeff's valuable insights, experiences, and vision for the economic development field. So let's join the conversation.
So, without further ado, I'm going to call on the spirit of Jeff Finkle and welcome Jeff to this special meeting of the OEDA board members and certified economic developers. Jeff?
Mark, it's great to see you. David, thank you for your introduction. I apologize. I am somehow having camera problems today, and I tried to solve them. Somebody gave me a portable camera. It worked for a couple minutes, and then it appeared it did not want to work either. It is 4:09 in the afternoon where I am. I happen to be spending a couple months at the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. As some of you may know, when I left IEDC in February of 2022, I immediately jumped on a plane and came here and worked for about 10 months. And I've been back here for the months of October, November, and into December. I work with a program called the LEAD program, Local Employment and Economic Development. They are, in a different way, serving the same constituencies that IEDC and OEDA do as well. It's fun staying engaged in this world that we all enjoy called economic development. So thank you for having me today, Mark.
Jeff, it's nice to have you with us this morning. Talk a little bit about how you reflect on your years as head of OEDA and of IEDC, and what you think the biggest challenges that this profession are going to face.
You know, it's interesting. You had warned me that you were going to ask a question like that, Mark. And, you know, I'm probably double the age of some of the people on this call today. And I remember walking into IEDC in 1986. And in 1986, many organizations in economic development didn't even have computers. And if you think about the technology transition we've made as a profession, we've moved a long way. We're now, for those of us who read or hear from Dean Whitaker up in Michigan, you know, he's talking about using AI for site selection and issues that we're going to be dealing with. In 1986 through probably 2000, maybe a little earlier than that, you know, the site selectors, and I'm not going to focus on site selection a lot today, but they used to send out copied surveys as they were trying to figure out sites. So if you were an economic developer, you'd be sitting at your desk. You might either over a fax machine or in a letter, you would get a note from a site selector, and they would be asking you questions about sites. They'd be talking about what existing buildings you might have. They might even be asking about where the nearest international airport is, etc. Well, today, many people don't even get the survey because you've been ruled out for one reason or other based on databases that these guys own or buy or get data from in some way. Will the next step be AI takes it down to the final two? That's a far distance from 1986 when QED, which was the organization I was hired by, didn't even have. Well, they had one computer and they didn't know what to do with it. That's on one side. The other side is what are the issues that we're dealing with? You know, in my time in the profession, brownfields became a big deal. In let's see, in 1981, when I joined the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, downtown Washington, D.C., and many downtowns across the country, including Times Square, Cleveland, Ohio, you name it, they were not safe places. They were not where you'd want to spend time at night. And, our downtowns have made a tremendous comeback in many places. Now, Washington, D.C. is having problems again in a post COVID environment with less than 50% people showing up to their offices. But, those are have all been either emerging issues or issues that went up and then came back down and maybe going back up again. I would joke when I gave speeches that economic developers didn't know how to spell the words workforce. In the last 10 years, if economic developers didn't know and understand and appreciate who their workforce partners are, they were going to lose existing employers, and they certainly weren't going to be able to recruit new employers without having a real sense of what their employers needed in a workforce and what they needed to do to help those businesses be successful in a competitive marketplace for workers, not just a competitive marketplace for places. So those are a few of my thoughts, Mark.
Talk a little bit more about AI and your sense of how that's going to impact us.
Well, I don't know how many people on here have used AI yet, but it was funny. It is here at the OECD, and by the way, if anybody doesn't know a lot about OECD, there are 5,000 employees here. I am just one small cog in a very large organization, helping the advanced countries in the world think about what's going on in the world, both in education. They do tractor regulation here so that you can take a tractor from one country to another, and it actually is going to work with the systems that exist in those countries. You can back up a tractor to a trailer made in Poland, and it might actually work in Japan as well. But they use AI here. In fact, I used it the other day. I was building a list, and somebody sat down, and it's not difficult to do if you haven't done it, but I asked for a list. I typed into the computer what I was looking for. Next thing I knew, I had a list. Was it perfect? Nah, it wasn't perfect. But it was better than anything I could have produced in 15 hours. It got to me within 5 minutes. And, those are the types of things that AI can do. It can answer questions. It can troll the internet. It can troll databases that it might have access to and get us answers to questions that, yeah, they may not be perfect. The AI is going to improve, but it's going to save us a lot of time when you're able to use it. And so I'm not going to answer it from a specific economic development point of view, but I can give you a couple ideas. let's say, for instance, you're talking to, and let's stay on this tractor thing that I jumped on. You're talking to a tractor implement company who may want to locate in your community, and they want a supplier network. Well, you might be able to go into AI and figure out who are the supplier network for a tractor implement company within 200 miles. If you've asked the question correctly, and there are answers to that on the internet, frankly, AI may well be able to help you identify that and go on to your next economic development issue that you dealt with. Otherwise, you're going to hand that to somebody on your staff, or you're going to be sitting up nights trying to figure that out on your own. And AI may have done 80% of the work for you just like that. In theory, it can write an article for you. You got to be careful on those things. You don't know where they're taking the information from. Are you going to get hit with plagiarism at some point? But there's a number of ways to use it.
How do you see economic development in Canada and Europe as compared to how we practice it in the United States?
Well, the easy answer to that, and there is an easy answer, is the way we collect taxes. One of the reasons that we are so good at economic development is we're competing against everybody. If you're in Dublin, you're competing against Hilliard. If you're Hilliard, you're competing against Delaware. If you're Delaware, you're competing against Zanesville and Newark. And one of the reasons you're competing is your city manager has said, we need to increase the tax base and we need some more high-paying jobs in our communities. And so you're off chasing both jobs, but you're also chasing revenue for your municipal government. And in Europe, that is unheard of. And it's unheard of because most of the taxes are generated at the national level and redistributed. So people aren't competing against one another. And now they are competing, but they're competing primarily to create jobs so that their citizens hopefully have better qualities of life. They don't have the second measure of how much taxes are going to be generated by a company. And their opponents are not necessarily in country, but they tend to be maybe out of country or far away, as opposed to a community that's 30 miles from you or 20 miles from you. That would be the primary difference. The second, they shape economic development, particularly here in Europe, in different ways. Some of the people on this phone or on this Zoom call today, they may be working on cultural issues, but culture is seen as an economic development asset. And many economic developers in Europe, maybe even in Australia, are trying to think about culture as a job generator, but at the same time as something that brings quality of life to their communities. So they're working on both of those. And secondly, they're looking at social enterprise. They're looking about how not-for-profits generate jobs and what they can do to support nonprofits in both their goals of undertaking activities, but also as organizations that are job generators. Those would be a couple examples that I see that seem somewhat different than what we would have been looking at as the forefront in our responsibilities in the States.
Sean Hughes has a question. And Sean, why don't you just go ahead and open up your mic?
Thanks, Mark. Sorry, it took me a moment to do
Need
that.
help with that? Oh, there you go.
Can you point it out? All right. Hi, Jeff. How are you? Go Bobcats.
Yes, thanks.
So, is it realistic to think that the tariffs that we're discussing that might be imposed with this next presidential cycle will actually make global companies consider opening plants in the United States, given that we're seeing similar workforce challenges that the rest of the world is seeing?
I think depending upon how deep the tariffs are, will they make a difference? I think a 25% tariff that are being talked about in Canada and Mexico, that's a pretty healthy tariff. Would that cause somebody to move from Mexico to the US? They still have a huge wage difference. They don't have the wage difference in Canada. And also the China U.S. Thing, the wage differential between China and the U.S. is pretty dynamic as well. You know, I see the tariffs maybe not bringing as many jobs as we might think, but helping solving some of our debt issues as a country, because it's just going to, if they are implemented, it's going to bring a fair amount of money. You notice that Biden didn't reduce them when he became president, because we've already gotten so used to that money coming in that he didn't want to screw up the money flow that was coming in. Sean, this may be a hair beyond my skill level as well to figure out, at what point is the tariff high enough, and what types of businesses does it bring back? I think the CHIPS Act is likely to bring some particular types of businesses back, but as you guys are probably realizing, Intel is having enough of their own economic problems that that might not be the as great of a win as we hope. As being somebody who was originally born and bred in Licking County, I wanted that thing in the worst way. Licking County hasn't had great employers for a long time. People are spending more time driving to Columbus for great jobs as opposed to my father, who would drive 10 minutes down to the Westinghouse facility, or my uncle who drove to the Rockwell facility, or my Uncle Joe who drove to the Barlight facility, and none of those exist anymore. So having Intel come to Licking County was of great pride to me, and a great hope. And I'm still hoping in it. And by the way, I'm David and Mark, I'm going to do a little advertisement. The OECD is having a webinar on Wednesday, December 11th, and Kenny McDonald's going to be speaking on it, and he's going to be talking about the CHIPS Act and Intel, and we're going to have a number of other people. And it's going to be talking about industrial policy and things that countries can do to return jobs to their shore, et cetera. Anybody who wants any information on it, if you're connected to me on LinkedIn, you just click on my LinkedIn page. And if you're not connected, you still click on my LinkedIn page, and you'll find the information I put up this afternoon. So
Yeah, Jeff, we'll put it out next Monday in our weekly, but we'll also put it on social.
great. Thank you very much, David.
Jeff, you've been through a number of changes in federal administrations, and having been through one term of President Trump, what's the best advice for economic developers, or any prognostications you want to make in general about the new administration?
So there are two things that I would recommend people on this call, or economic developers generally, do. First, if there are any federal programs that are important to you, start talking to your local congressman, your U.S. senator. Well, you have two of them still. talk to both of their offices and educate them on what's important and why. And tie it to jobs, tie it to success. Get your local chamber, if they will, to pass a resolution supporting you and what you're talking to your local congressman about. Second, um, I called it political malpractice. Um, the last Trump administration was not very successful at doing the things that they wanted to do. Now, that's not a comment on their policies. It is a comment on it took them 3 years to get an assistant secretary at EDA. They were not ready to govern. This time they're going to be ready to govern. They're announcing cabinet secretaries left and right. They'll be doing undersecretaries just as quickly and assistant secretaries. They're not going to be waiting around and not having a full staff like they didn't have 4 years ago. It took them forever to get people in place. People is policy. And if you don't have people in your various agencies carrying out the mission and what the president, in this case, president elect, ran upon, you're never going to get it accomplished. This time they're going to get it accomplished, for better or for worse. You may be fully on board with what they're doing. If you were, 8 years ago, you would have been disappointed because they never put the people in place to do it. They'll be there this time. They have a majority in both the House and Senate. They're going to get a lot done in the on the Trump policy. That may mean EDA may not be around anymore. I don't know that for sure, but I would think if you read the 2025 report that was put out by a coalition of conservative groups, I can't imagine, I haven't read it, but I can't imagine that EDA is treated well there. Will the CDBG program survive or have the same level of resources that it has now? Industrial development bonds. When interest rates were low, it really didn't make a whole lot of difference. SBA 504, will it be around? So it's going to be concerning to a lot of people what will happen to some of the tools that we use. It also may require you guys to convince your state legislature that they need to replace some of those tools at the state level. So those would be the, kind of my comments on where you go and proceed. But educate your staff at your congressional offices. If you can get your congressman on the phone or in person, make sure they understand why these things are important. Also look at what committees they're on. If they're not on a relevant committee, they may not have a lot of input, but you might want to point out there may be a different Ohio congressman on one of those committees that's important, and encourage them to educate their fellow colleague.
When you think about being a Buckeye, how has being a Buckeye influenced your career and your approach to life? And I won't even ask about Ohio University.
So it's interesting, Mark. I was head of QED / IEDC for 37 years. It was, I always related what I was talking about to my hometown. It was, what was going on in Newark that you could relate to, Boise, Idaho, or you could relate to Tulsa, Oklahoma, or you could relate to Phoenix, Arizona. Um, things that I talked about included, boy, they could make the downtown stronger if they had second story housing. Well, guess what? They have second story housing in most of the buildings in downtown Newark now. You really understood um, the issues around the major industrial employers. I just went through three of them a couple minutes ago and talked about when those jobs weren't there. There are a lot of people whose quality of life and their standard of living went down as a result. Um, you know, uh, the blue collar job in Newark, Ohio used to be able to put kids through college. People could own homes. They could look forward to a great retirement. Well, some of those things don't occur the same way that they used to in the 1950s, 1960s, maybe up till the mid late 70s. Um, as some of you may know, before I worked for Governor Rhodes for a couple years, and the thing I was working for in Rhodes, I was dealing with the physical plant of the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation, and by that I meant when we were closing many of the facilities, we were transferring the land to communities. Athens Mental Health Center is finally getting a reuse. Dayton Mental Health Center, I think, was pulled to the ground. Columbus, Ohio Psychiatric Center was pulled to the ground. And that those lessons actually helped prepare me for 5 years at HUD when I was at HUD between 1981 and 1986. They were redevelopment opportunities. So the basis of what I learned in economic development, I learned in Ohio. And Ohio is a great place to learn economic development or the ups and downs of economies. The other funny thing, Mark, is I've always referred to economic developers as an exportable product out of Ohio as well. If you look around the country, there are Ohio economic developers in a wide variety of places. We've seen them in Texas, we've seen them in Florida, California. It's if you can make it in Ohio, maybe you can make it everywhere, anywhere, just like they say about New York. David, I see you took yourself off of mute.
Yeah, I'm interested in diving into this a little bit. Mark was asking you how it changed your career and approach, and I'm also interested in kind of given what you've seen nationally, what do you think Ohio, in terms of the economic development profession, does particularly well? And what do you think are areas of the country where we should maybe be paying attention, where we could learn some things and get better? Like who's doing certain things really well in other parts of the country?
So things that I've thought Ohio did particularly well, and Mark had one of these hats for a while. Um, Ohio was doing SBA 504s particularly well for a long time. Mark was doing them in Columbus, David Main down in Cincinnati, Steve Budd and his team over in Dayton. They were, I had a former chair, Kurt Chilcott, who was producing the highest volume of 504 in San Diego each year. But Ohio was doing pretty good at that. I think Ohio had to do pretty well at brownfield remediation and brownfield reuse. I mean, you look at the industrial heartland. If you weren't doing that well in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, you were going to not be able to consolidate industrial land or reuse land for other uses. And I think Ohio did that along with the Ohio EPA. I saw the Ohio EPA being pretty um, good at supporting economic developers. And as we all tried to clean up some of these sites. Um, it took Ohio a long time to get bid legislation, downtown redevelopment legislation in place. But it finally did, and there were other places ahead of it. The funny thing that I thought was amusing in Ohio is for the longest time, as we were looking for the people who were big game hunters in our economic development organizations, we kept recruiting people from the South because we thought they had the magic elixir. They didn't have the magic elixir. They just had no unions to deal with. They had bigger incentives and they had cheaper workforce. But many of our business leaders, when they were recruiting people, they said, "Oh well, Atlanta's doing a good job. Let's recruit somebody from Atlanta," or some other place was doing well. We need somebody from North Carolina. Um, I don't think that's the case anymore. Now, Kenny was recruiting people to Charlotte, but I mean, he was a northerner, just happened to be a westerner from way north. But those would be my top of hand observations, David.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to the other side of the question. Everyone knows me. I'm always looking at the devil's advocate question. What did Ohio not do as well that we ought to be able to improve on?
Well, I think
And we'll turn the microphone off if you'd like on that one, Jeff.
no.
Turn the recording
I think they didn't put enough money into economic development for a long time. And John Kasich and Jobs Ohio flipped that. Now, I think have been arguments to be made by some that they put money in the wrong places, but you guys have, I think, without question, the best funded economic development organization in the country now in Jobs Ohio. So it is so nobody can say that you don't have money available to you to do a lot of interesting things. I think um, it is still, there's still a lot of poverty in the major cities in Ohio. Now, you're not going to solve 100% of that by economic development, but you know, um, there are a lot of opportunities to do a lot of creative things to get more people employed, to get more people trained and workforce. And we've got, and maybe this is housing stock as much as anything. There's a lot of rundown neighborhoods, and even in Cleveland, Newark, Ohio, Akron, Canton, and those places have to be reinvested in, not only from the economic development side, but they've also got to be reinvested in on the housing stock side. I, does Ohio have enough money to solve all these problems? Nobody has enough money to solve all these problems, but there's a lot of opportunities uh, to revitalize many of our cities. The story I like telling, and I forget which immigrant group is in inner city Dayton. Where are they from? Russia, Turkey, someplace, and they went in and they bought up inner city Dayton houses, and they have revitalized a large section of. At one time there were probably people coming up to work for the auto industry and from Appalachia who were living in those. They went completely downhill. The lowest of low incomes were probably living in inner city Dayton. And now this group has come in and they're rehabbing the city to the best, or many of the housing stocks. And admittedly, some of them are moving to the suburbs now. Now, that's not going to be the solution to every Ohio town, but it certainly has been interesting to watch.
Well, let's take off from that and ask about immigration. One of the stories that caught a lot of national attention during the campaign was the story about Springfield. And one of the interesting things about the story about Springfield was that the the legal immigration that was taking place was actually enhancing their economic competitiveness by filling some major workforce needs. I think there's a huge challenge here for economic developers on the workforce side on how to be realistic, but also be clear that immigration is a plus in terms of our competitiveness. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I want to tell you a funny story before I jump into that. So my dad gets married. I don't know, 1951. He didn't have two nickels to rub together. They got married at the Catholic church, or they couldn't even go into the Catholic church because my mother wasn't Catholic. They had to be married in an off building. Anyhow, he didn't have two nickels to rub together. My dad took my mother to Springfield, Ohio for their honeymoon. I love Springfield, Ohio for that story and that story alone. I don't know of anybody else who ever took their bride to Springfield for their honeymoon other than my father. Um, I think we're going to be in real trouble if they think they're going to start shipping out, what is it, 10 million undocumented immigrants. You know, I picked up a statistic the other day. I think in California, um, young or male Latinos is 80% of the home construction workforce supplies. I think that's probably similarly true in Northern Virginia, although most of them are from Central America. Uh, I don't. I had a cousin who lived in Defiance, Ohio, and worked for Campbell's Soup Company. I don't know who's going to pick the tomato crop up there if we don't have a way of figuring out how to work with immigrants. If they want to start to focus on those who've committed crimes, I hope they do. Uh, but if we could really hurt our economy in a big way. Um, but the other side of it is nobody's willing to take on the issue of legalizing those people who are providing a lot of work here. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We need many of these people because they provide important jobs. At the same time, wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out a way to take some of these folks and give them a 20-year work visa and say, have at it. Maybe you can't become a citizen unless you leave the country and come back. But here's something that allows you to continue to help our economy.
David, you know something about Springfield, don't you? Didn't you spend some good time in Springfield?
Yeah, I did. I work there and live there and certainly appreciate the folks that are there. I think it's going to be a really dynamic and interesting space within workforce development and within the economy. So yeah, love Springfield. Talk to those people on a not irregular basis. I want to make sure I want to take the conversation, or at least ask this question. So we have a lot of economic development professionals. Some are newer on I've been certified through our certification program, and hopefully we'll eventually also pursue CFD, national certification. We're encouraging that. What advice, and we have some experienced veterans on this call as well. Always interested in talking to people who've been in the profession and been as successful as you, Jeff, and in your role. Like, what advice do you have for people beginning their career and advancing their career to become more effective, to enjoy it more, to make more of an impact? Just what's your general advice to economic development professionals and leaders?
I think getting the Ohio certification is certainly going to help somebody. Will the certification increase your pay? We've proven it does at the national level. People who are certified tend to last longer in the field. They tend to get paid better. And they tend to be a lot more comfortable in their skill set, meaning that preparing for an exam and going through those courses help. The other thing that I think, and I don't know if you guys have a formal or informal mentor program, but it doesn't hurt to have a mentor as you're working your way through a career. I had mentors, almost none of whom were in the economic development field, but they were always there for great advice. And I think that can be really helpful to people. You know, I was helping somebody here at the OECD write a report on leadership the other day. And the leadership skills that we wrote about at IEDC included, one, um, understand politics, not just politics of your town, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, but understand the politics of your board if you have a board. Understand understand your town. Second, understand the economy. Understand what's going on in the city that you work. I must tell you that there are a lot of economic development organizations where there's only one person. And sometimes, if you're only a one person shop, you also don't have somebody second guessing your decisions. I've seen economic developers, for instance, to encourage more development when their water plant was not going to accommodate it. And in order to get more water, it was going to take a 3-year addition to the water plant. And the client, the tenant that they were trying to recruit could be up much faster than that. So you really need to understand, what are the strengths and the weaknesses of your community. The third advice I would give somebody is know how to make a presentation, know how to write, know how to get up and give a speech, know how to prepare a deck of slides, not literally slides anymore, but there are a number of things that we need to do in order to look professional, act professional, and be ethical. There was more to the advice I was given to this person on leadership, but well, those were some of the top things.
Do you think that ethics are a big issue for our profession right now?
Ethics are a big issue on two sides of the coin. First, is the economic developer ethical? I staffed IEDC had a committee that dealt with ethical violations, and I staffed that for, I don't know, 10 years. The biggest ethical issues weren't theft, although we did have a small handful of economic developers who did take money from their organizations or took things from developers. That was not very common. Sexual harassment was probably a bigger deal where mostly, I think, I can't remember, male economic developers taking advantage of one of their employees or doing something inappropriate with one of their employees. That tended to be a little bigger, but the reverse side is actually was more troubling to me, and there wasn't anything we could do about it. And that is the economic developer being squeezed by a business leader in a community, threatened by a city council member if they didn't do a particular project, a boss expecting they would push something through that was not justifiable in pushing through. And it is that issue that concerns me more for the professional economic developer. How do they deal with those intrusions on their good judgment, on their and having their livelihood threatened by somebody who just wants money or something out of the economic development organization that they probably shouldn't have. And I spent as much time.
Let's kill another easy. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I spent as much time when I was teaching ethics talking about that as opposed to the other side of it when I was teaching the course.
Well, and I think it was clearly during your term in your leadership at IEDC that IEDC developed both the ethics training and the ethics standards that are now kind of a regular part of what we certainly teach in our basic course. Let's jump to another easy issue, and that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen a lot of corporate pushback on this topic in terms of the initiatives in general. Less pushback and greater adoption, it seems to me, in the economic development profession. Is this discussion at risk at the moment?
I don't. I think it clearly is. Um, you know. Trump is looking at the Department of Defense and saying they've spent too much time talking about DEI. They're going to go through the federal agencies and they're going to eliminate, I think, the DEI programs. I, DEI is, I think, a different way of saying, look at your staff. If it's all white male, maybe you're missing out on something in that 50% or 51% of the US population is female. We're going to be in California, I think they are a majority minority state now, or they're pretty darn close. And if you're not hiring from the broad base of people available to you, maybe you're making a mistake. Maybe you have blinders on, and maybe you're not taking advantage of the best people that are out there. I don't care if you call it DEI or what. If people ought to just say, if everybody's 6'5" or above, unless you're a basketball team, maybe you're not looking at all the options of people you can hire, and you may want to just throw your net a little wider and sift through and look for the very best people you can find.
Jeff, is there anything that you think of that you were unable to achieve at IEDC, given the accomplishments during the whole period, the simple existence and the merger, I think, was really significant. Is there anything that you weren't able to achieve in your term at IEDC that you think merits continued attention?
Well, so it's funny, Mark. As I took the job, I made a list of things that I thought, and you don't know a job until you're really into it. There was something that I wanted to accomplish that I never truly got, and I could never figure out funding streams to do it. And what that was is I wanted to have program experts in a variety of places so that we could serve our members better. I wanted to have somebody that was focused on real estate, redevelopment, kind of land and bricks and mortar. I wanted to have somebody that focused on finance. Later I would have wanted somebody to focus on workforce issues. There were just a whole variety of, I wanted specialists on the team that maybe they were responsible for one or two of our training courses and a webinar each year, and the content at our annual conference, and some articles in our newsletter, and maybe they would be picked up on a occasional contract or two. I never got there, but David's going to wish that too, because it's hard in small organizations to to have the expertise that you want. Um, I could talk a good game about a number of areas of economic development, um, but I was an expert in some areas and not others, and I needed and wanted that additional bench strength, as you might call it, to be for a stronger organization. And I hope the IEDC of the future will get there. It needs you have to grow. It needs economic resources to do so. Um, I needed 3 different versions of Mark Barbash on my team, maybe 5 different versions of Mark Barbash to support the substance of what we did, and we could be a better use for our members.
Well, certainly, I don't think there's anyone on this call who thinks that you talk a good game. You obviously have been personally responsible for the strength of economic development in this country and certainly in Ohio. And a lot of us appreciate your efforts that you've put in over the years, myself included. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with, Jeff?
Oh, of course. First, we want the Bobcats to win the MAC championship, and we want them to go on and win whatever bowl game they end up in. And I must say, I was at a Thanksgiving dinner on Saturday night with my phone open during the Ohio State game, and I can't be more devastated. There's still a way for them to work themselves back up into contention for the national championship. We need to find them a new field goal kicker between now and then, and an offense that doesn't break down when they run up against a couple of people called Wolverines. But other than that, go Bucks, go Bobcats. And it's great to see all of you. David, congratulations on being the head of OEDA, and I'm just very pleased. And one of my favorite people, I see Ellen Hines is on here. She gets tired of hearing. I think I suggested to her that she might want to consider the job that she's in, and thank God she took it, and thank God they were smart enough to hire her. So, and Mark, it's always great to see you.
Always
Hey,
great
Alan,
to see you.
how the heck are you?
I'm great. It's interesting, as you mentioned, the changes taking place federally, and I worked under both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and the Trump administration part 2 or 2.0. I think your statements were just spot on. I think they're going in, and they're not going to be spending a lot of time figuring out what their plan is, but I'm hopeful. But I loved your comments, everything. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful resource to me over the years. I first went to the federal forums that IEDC had, and we were able to overturn a federal decision locally, thanks to being connected to the right people that Jeff had invited to the event. And also just want to give a shout out, as he mentioned, to connect with your legislators. This is an extremely important time. Advocacy, no matter if you're a 501c6 or a C3, there are different ways that you can reach out to your legislators, but you absolutely need to stay in touch with your businesses and what your community needs. Now is a very pivotal time for what that way forward looks like. So anyway, thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you, Ellen.
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks, Jeff. And just for those on the call, we are working on, figuring out how we're going to approach government affairs, advocacy, policy, and those kinds of things. I would encourage everybody on the call, if you haven't done it yet, please fill out the member survey, in which we specifically ask in each of those areas how you want us to approach it. As we figure out that structure, we'll work on reconstituting a government affairs committee so that we can approach these kinds of things and be ready for it. But we have to kind of reinvigorate that. Always good to see so many people on. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your contributions to the profession and being here. Jeff, thank you so much. I just really appreciate you sharing your time from abroad to share your perspectives from a long and distinguished career and now working on global economic development. It's a privilege, and we appreciate that. Mark, thank you so much for setting this up, and look forward to more of these kinds of events and conversations in the future. Okay, Mark, you want to officially close?
And with that, I think we're done. Keep your eyes open for the reminder about the membership meeting that'll be taking place next week. David, when is that meeting?
Sorry about that. December the 17th is the annual membership meeting.
Okay. All right, everyone. Have a good day. Stay warm if you possibly can, and please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
In 2025, we rise with the tide. OEDA, pushing dreams where Ohio's pride. New spring event where talents collide. Economic